If you haven't been with us the last couple of weeks, we've just been talking about parenting, and I just thought it would be fun to invite some parents into the conversation because, as I have said, each week I am not a parent expert. My wife and I, we are very much in the thick of parenting, and I did not go to school for parenting. I don't have any sort of degree that tells you that I'm a great parent. We're learning as we go. So we want to invite some other parents in, and I will also say that they're not experts either. I'm not sure if you really have parenting experts the more I think about it. I think you have people who know a lot of good theories, and then you've got those of us who are just in it. And so I'm excited for you to hear from some parents who have been in it and continue to be in it for all the joys and all the rest of it. One other disclaimer, let me just say, I am also not singling these parents out as the only good parents in our church. There are also a lot of other great parents in our church, but one of the things I love about these couples is that they are some of our key leaders here at Easton, and so there's a chance for you just to get to know them a little bit. They all serve in significant ways, and then specifically, I'll just tell you that Dave and Tom and James all serve on our elder board, which is really our leadership board here at Easton, and so I'm thrilled for you to get to just hear a little bit from them this morning. As you can see up here, we do have a number that if you have questions along the way, you can text us. They'll come to me, and I will try to weave them in as much as I can. I'll just warn you, last service, there was no way we could get to all the questions. But please send them, and I promise I will do my best to get to as many of them as possible. And then at the very end, if you're feeling really bold, there are a couple of microphones. If you're like, I don't want to text for whatever reason, you can make use of one of the mics as well. All right? So let me dive into this. Benners, Znaxes, mamas, thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to pick on the mamas first because I know that you have asked this question and discussed it. In a world of helicopter, bulldozer, lawnmower, snowplow, drone, all sorts of machinery that we describe parenting, what kind of parents are you, and what would your kids say?
So we are drone parents, which is like helicopter parents, but the use of technology. James and I were similar in that way, and our kids agreed. So.
Yeah, I'd say we use social media as well as any other technology platforms. It could be just checking on grades and homework assignments on school and those types of things. So we try not to get too, or we have tried not to get too involved, but just the drone has allowed us to kind of keep an eye on things and still keep a pretty good distance, except for on the occasion when we do need to step in.
There you go.
We also had the conversation in our house with our kids. I am the helicopter parent, and I will say that I have slowly grown away from that, but you have your first child and I helicoptered, I own that. And so I think they might agree with that. But as each child is different and as you grow as a parent and the kids eventually, they mature on their own, you take a different role.
Yeah, when we went over that equipment, my son actually was like, I'm like, which one am I? And he's like, well, you're just kind of there. And so I think what I'm hoping that means is actually I'm just a little bit of a balance or counterbalance to Heather as well. But both together are pretty involved with the kids. Yeah,
I love that.
I think listening to Lucas's list, at some point I was probably all of them. But I like to think maybe I was more of what I'd consider a pace car parent. You start them out, you start out that race, you set where they're going, and then you back off and let them go. But there are times then when there's danger or there's caution and the pace car comes back in again and helps to control things. So maybe that's where I was.
We didn't talk about our answers or coordinate the answer necessarily, but I was this morning thinking the same thing about the race car analogy. It's probably because we've been married 53 years. But anyway.
Great minds.
But from the equipment standpoint, the heavy equipment standpoint, I would probably say a backhoe operator because they are a piece of equipment that uses a lot of finesse. They're not like the bulldozers pushing on it. They're doing things delicately and moving dirt around. That's impressive to me. So I want to be like that.
I like that. There's a precision to what you're doing, and one of the things that kind of comes out when we talk about parenting is there's really a uniqueness to each child, and so a bulldozer sort of like just bulldozes everything, but there's a precision to each child and how you're parenting them. Can you talk a little bit about just how you looked at your kids differently and how you were just intentional about parenting them in different ways, because they are all each unique?
I was a teacher for 40-some years, and especially after I was saved, every day I would pray that God would show me the uniqueness of each child that sat in front of me throughout that day, and to see that child as God did. And I hope that I was able to do that with our own kids too. And they were all different, and they all went through different stages at different times. There were different things that pushed their buttons, and as I was saying, one of them, if you needed to take something away, it was video games, because that was, back in the day, that was the big thing. And the other one was take away snacks, because that was the worst thing you could do for somebody. So
I love it.
Yes, they were just all different. And yet, and one of the questions Lucas had asked was about fairly and or equally. And I think fairly, hopefully, for all of them, but not always equally.
Yeah, that's good.
I would just add that each child is different and they need different things at different times, echoing what Lois said. And so you have to be dialed in to know each of your children and what they need. And sometimes they just want to talk, and sometimes they don't want to talk. And sometimes we have a son and a daughter, so I'm sure there's differences there. Some are more comfortable talking a lot and some talk less. But if you are really dialed in and know what your kids need, then you provide what they need when they need it.
So I want to go back in time a little bit here, and just when you first found out you were going to be parents, how did you feel about that? I mean, were you excited? Were you terrified? Was it both? Just tell me a little bit about just sort of like your initial response, and where did your brain go when you thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be raising this child?
Well, we had planned it, and I guess it worked out, and so we were excited. Yes, and we had read some books, and we had talked about some goals that we had set, and he's very goal-oriented. So, yes, we were excited, and I think, I don't know that you're ever always, you don't know what you're getting into, right?
Right.
And
you don't know what you don't know.
You have no idea what's about to happen. But at the time, we thought we were prepared.
Ignorance is bliss at that point.
That's good.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. We were very excited. Like you said, you don't really know what you don't know until you go through it. And, our kids were both very different in their first year. Our son he had colic and just had eczema. Just everything was difficult for him, in terms of sleeping through the night. And so when the second came around, we were like, okay, we know what this is. We're getting ourselves ready for this. But it was completely different. She just, you could just put her on the couch in the middle of a party and she would fall asleep. Like, it was just very, very different. And so, even when you think you're prepared for something, it doesn't always work out that way anyway. But we were definitely excited.
We actually were married 5 years before we had our first child, which meant we got to know one another. But I still remember when we had our first child thinking, what did we get ourselves into?
I was very unrealistic, I think. I had never been around little kids. And so I had this Hollywood picture of coming in with this baby, and everything was going to be beautiful and perfect. And that morning before David came to pick me up in the hospital, our freezer broke, and it was June. And I had done what all the books had said, make dinners and freeze them. Well, all the freezer things were dripping out onto the floor. And I come in with this baby, and he had been trying to parcel our food out to neighbors, and I was going to put him into the family room, and it was covered in dog hair because we had this part husky, part shepherd, and I'm getting out the vacuum and vacuuming, this is not the way it was supposed to be. And so that was my beginning. And within the week, I had stepped on a dead mouse in the laundry room, and I thought, if I can do this, I guess I can do anything.
I love it. there's real life right there. That's awesome. When you look back on those early weeks, early months, was there some advice that somebody gave you, or maybe you picked up in a book, or maybe you just sort of started to figure out for yourself, and maybe you want to give to young parents in some of those early stages that really are so challenging?
I would say that someone advised me one time to ask for help. It's okay that you need help as a new mom or a new parent. So I was fortunate that I had help. Both my parents and Tom's parents live local and they could help. So I would say don't be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, this came up in the earlier service, and chance to kind of reflect on it. Fairly, sort of organized. We like our home to look well. We had 3 kids at one point under the age of 5. And under the age of 3, sorry. At that age, you're hosting birthday parties and things because it's easier for people to come to you and rather than go elsewhere with 3 kids and all the baggage that goes along with it. And I can remember my parents pulling me aside and saying, James, we know you want the house to look nice. Cindy's really busy with the kids. You can either have a really nice looking house or you can have terrific kids. And Cindy's doing a great job with the kids, so don't worry about what the house looks like. It doesn't all need to be perfect.
Yeah, that's great.
I would counsel you that there's no manual on it. Things are a little bit upside down. At our age now, we feel like we know a lot more. Oh, we know how to maybe raise children, but now we're too old to have children. Whereas when we were young, we didn't know what we were doing, and that's when you have the children. So it's an upside down thing that God has done in his wisdom.
And that's the beauty of being able to invite you all into this conversation. And now you know who they are, and so you can track them down and glean wisdom from them, as Carrie and I do. So really appreciate that. I want to ask one more question, kind of like as you think back. Are you surprised at the kind of parent that you are? As you look back when you first have that child, and then now some of you are 20 plus years into being a parent, you're like, wow, this isn't how I thought I would have done it. Or no, this is exactly the kind of parent that I thought I was going to be.
I wouldn't say I'm surprised. Honestly, one of the things, some of these questions and thinking about it was that I didn't know what I didn't know, but I did know that I wanted to be involved in my kid's life. And, that as I've changed careers over the years and done different things, I think that is something that's always been pretty consistent. So I guess I'm not surprised that I've been involved so much.
You want to be involved, yeah.
Yeah.
And you've made choices to make that a reality.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a sacrifice, right? You have to make it a priority, be there, be involved. And it's not always easy because you're struggling, different tensions, other demands that you have on your time. So you have to make it a priority for sure.
Yeah.
I would just add that the way I was brought up with my parents, they were there all the time for me. They came to every game I had, every play, every music, everything. And they were both there for almost everything. And they would drive together. And it made me crazy as a teenager. Like, why are they're always here. No one else's parents are always here. And now looking back, I realized that they made sacrifices to always be there at my things and the things. And I value that. And we try to do that for our kids. So I value that my parents gave me that. And I absolutely did not appreciate it at the time.
Yeah.
But I hope I'm doing that for
honest.
my kids.
I
And
love
maybe
that.
someday they will appreciate. So.
That's always the hope, right? That someday your kids will appreciate you.
Either way, it's the right thing to do.
There you go. I like it.
To emphasize what Heather said, it's so important as a parent that when your kids are involved in different sporting events, if you will, or other extracurricular activities, it's important to be there. That really, for them, it's important. That's more than anything they learn on the soccer field, anything they learn in basketball. To have you there, that's what means something to them. And so be there.
We had made the decision to take our kids down to a different school out of our school system. And it meant traveling almost an hour each way. And so we made a commitment at that point that if our kids wanted to be involved in sports, if they wanted to be involved in student government, drama, you name it, when there were birthday parties on Saturdays, that we would be there and that they could be involved in things because it was our choice of where they were going to go to school. And so, yes, we were there for everything. I did teach my kids for up through middle school, so when they had anything, I was there anyway. And David would make a commitment to come after work, even though sometimes it meant he would leave work, watch a game, and then go back and work for a couple hours so that he could be at the games. And as I had said before, they liked it, but they didn't like when he coached from the side. But, yes, exactly. But I would just say, looking back, I don't think that I would do that any differently. And our kids grown, they're Heather and Tom's ages now, and Lucas's. They have often said how much they appreciated us being there and doing those things and being involved in their lives. Although I will say, 2 different kids, one day I showed up to help with the drama, and the one comes out and, "Hi, Mom, how are you doing? Good to see you." And the other one is behind the curtains going, "My mom is out there. What's she doing here?" So, yes, they're all different.
As you can imagine, I'm getting some really great questions here. I'm going to do my best to work through them. As you can imagine, though, there's quite a few around just the busyness of life when you've got multiple kids, especially trying to juggle everything, and then questions about technology. So let's talk about, we're kind of talking about the busyness right now. How did you juggle schedules? And then specifically, as we've talked about, you've got church on Sunday mornings. There's a lot of sports that happen on weekends, including on Sunday mornings. How have you navigated some of that with your kids?
We always tried to make Sunday morning a priority and Wednesday nights, and our kids really have some great memories from that. The Sunday school teachers, the volunteers. In fact, one came back for Easter, and he saw one of the teachers walking across the parking lot, and he said, "I don't remember her name, but she was a great Sunday school teacher." So nice. It doesn't always work out. Of course, there's meets and other things that happen, but we always tried to make it a priority when we could. But it was also about making their faith a priority in the everyday. Mm-hmm. So when they'd come home from school, I'd ask, did they do anything that let people know that they love Jesus? Or before they'd leave for an event, I would remind them, who they were doing it for. Mm-hmm. So you've got to weave it in, but definitely, we did our best to try to make it a priority.
I would say that there's a lot of practicality to the number of things that you get involved in and kid-specific, but it was also an opportunity. I can remember Cindy singing hymns and things with the kids in the car, or doing a quick devotional at the car, and helping them understand that Sundays weren't, church wasn't coming here necessarily, and what worship meant didn't have to happen just in this building, but it could happen outside. And what does that look like?
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, the daily walk that you're talking about, and always bringing that to the forefront is so important. And, we also had tried to make Sunday morning a priority. And both Heather and I coached all through youth, and I'm now doing it in high school with my kids, which is a real blessing. But ever more so, much more than when we were younger, right? Every coach, every sport wants you to play year-round, and the demands are very difficult, and it's very challenging to try and balance it all. So one of the things when we first got into travel basketball, we pushed back, and I said to the commissioner, I said, "Listen, I'm not going to be able to be there for the games," because all the games were Sunday mornings. Like, that was the status quo, and just said, "Look, I won't be able to coach, and my son won't be able to play. Is there anything else we can do?" And we were able to move. While the other coaches kept Sunday morning, I was able to coach Sunday afternoon so that we could still protect Sunday morning. And, being involved, it helps to be able to set schedules and practices around your schedules. That's one of the benefits of coaching. But, I would just encourage you to push back a little bit. Sometimes, even if you're not the coach, and there might be other parents that would like a pushback there as well. And so see where you can go in terms of trying to protect your time frames. But I will say that it is challenging, and realistically, it doesn't mean that we were always able to accommodate. And sometimes you have tournaments and other things that are outside of your control. And I think that gets back to what James was saying about, it's not just while the routine is important, but it's also about the relationship with Christ and a day in and day out and making that the priority. And so when there are other conflicts, because there's other value in these experiences they're having as well, but they have to know how to navigate life and make these decisions, in the future. So that's really the focus, I think, yeah.
That's good. Anything you guys would add? Lois?
Not really.
Oh.
Well, as they said, it was a different time when our kids were growing up.
Sure.
And I don't think there were the demands for like community teams and whatnot.
Yeah, it's really challenging. And I can say, I think back to when I was a kid growing up, my parents, frankly, didn't have to answer these same kind of questions. And so part of what I think is important is just to recognize that we're all figuring this out the airplane is in flight and we're trying to build this thing, but keeping those priorities clear about, how you're going to make the decisions. Carrie and I have had a lot of conversations around, okay, where do we draw the line where if a sports team, for example, it's like, well, their practices are only on Sunday mornings, like we're out because we know that's a scheduled event. But like you said, sometimes tournaments end up on Sunday mornings, sometimes they don't. And to what extent are we willing to juggle that, knowing that we want church to be our priority? And in our case, it's a little bit tricky because I can't help drive on Sunday mornings. I kind of have this place I got to be every Sunday. So yeah, it's tricky. But as we were talking about earlier, and I would just encourage any parents who are living that reality, you're doing the best you can, have your priorities and talk through things to the extent that you can. And then there's grace. There is grace. God meets us in that. And I love what you all said just about weaving it into life, weaving that relationship with Jesus into life. It's even if your kids are never in sports, but the sum of your experience with Christianity, with believers, with Jesus is Sunday morning, like it's still not enough, right? If this is it, you check the box, don't expect your kids to love Jesus. That's just not going to cover it. So yeah, I love that. Let me move on because we're running out of time really fast here. A number of questions just around technology. We're going to talk more about this next week, I imagine, just so you know, and I'll explain why in a bit. But what's been your experience with technology, with your kids, and then how has it affected you as parents even?
Could I say one thing
Absolutely.
first? I'll defer to our colleagues here because my first cell phone was a hand-me-down from my daughter. So, that's where we are technologically,
Love it.
So I'll defer.
At 13, we allowed them to get a cell phone, but as far as social media and things like that, it was 15, and there were some things that were not allowed, like Snapchat, stuff that I couldn't monitor or that they could delete before I would see, and there was no privacy, so they knew that we could read their texts and look at their phone anytime. And then of course in the evening they had to plug it downstairs so that it wasn't never in the bedroom. So.
Yeah, we did and probably still do sort of approach the technology. It's ever evolving. Depending on your age, there was radio and TV and video games, and there were all these new things being introduced into your kids' lives. And the question is, how do you manage those things? They're not necessarily bad themselves. It's sort of how you use them. And so it's become a tool to learn self-control, time management, general discernment. We see posts from other adults, other peers, and we talk about, was that a good idea? How else could they have handled that? That type of thing. And it's going to continue to evolve. Our kids are going to need to deal with artificial intelligence and all kinds of things. And if they don't get started managing those things now, they're not going to learn how to do that. One last thing I'll say, I know there's a little bit maybe of an older crowd out here. I would say get involved. It's a way to get involved in your grandkids' lives, your nieces, your nephews, and you can plug into what they're doing and have an awareness without getting really involved and sending them a bunch of questions. But it's a great way to just stay connected.
Yeah, just quickly, we had a very similar approach. It was like 8th grade, when our kids got cell phones, and the same point about, there's no right to privacy here, full transparency, phones not in the bedroom at night, a lot of similar things. And just to your point, James, I think it's not just for technology, but as a whole, kids are going to make mistakes, they're going to fail just like we did. And so our philosophy has been to, measured amounts of responsibility where they can test the waters under our guidance, so that, if you don't give them anything and then they go to college and it's unrestricted, they don't know how to handle it. So you want to try and do it in a measured way where you can kind of guide that process. And look, failure is how you learn the most. And so failing in a way where you can kind of shape them is kind of things that we've talked about.
That's great. One of the things that I concerns me most about a lot of the way the technology is used today, and I think this is always, to your point, it's always existed, but so much of it is about entertaining our kids, right? Keeping their attention on YouTube or social media or whatever. One of the questions that I have, and I've got a couple of questions from you all around this, is just in an age where it's all about like consuming entertainment, how did you really encourage your kids to be proactive, to empower them to make their own decisions, to be problem solvers, as opposed to simply taking more in, like going and doing? And
I would say that we often look for opportunities to push our kids outside of their comfort zones, encourage them to take leadership roles where they can. And so, it's not necessarily directly related to technology, but I think technology-wise, that's how kids communicate. So you can't just not engage.
Right, it's not a matter of...
You can't just,
doesn't
they're
exist.
really isolating themselves from the social dynamic at that point. So it's figuring out how to navigate it, and it's not always easy, for sure.
Yeah.
That's where I think the time management comes to play, and I would set limits so that it would force them to do something else, because you don't want them just sitting there consuming, and then of course they were busy with activities, and we did encourage leadership roles within their school, and so they were engaged in things that kept them busy.
Yeah, and I lost my train of thought there, but I think the idea of helping them choose which medium, which platform to use to communicate with friends, whether face-to-face or a phone call, or everything's texting right now. So it's like, hey, put the text down, give that person a call. This is a little bit more urgent. Or go visit your grandparents, or whatever the case may be, because they've got to learn how to connect with the person that they're trying to communicate with in the way that they want to communicate. So you're trying to meet them where they're at, but they also need to learn how to meet their audience where they're at as well.
Outside of technology, I think just supporting the kids and what they wanted to try, let them try. If they fail, you help pick them up and they can try something else. And in terms of having them learn to be self-sufficient, just a very small example, I was an English teacher. When they would have to write essays or research papers, my rule was you write it and you proofread it 3 times before you come and ask me to look at it. And that way, then I could sit with them and go over things that they had made a mistake, but I wasn't going to do it for them.
That's great. All right. We're running out of time here. I want to give you one last question for whoever wants, and that is just, what's your favorite part about being a parent?
I would say my favorite part about being a parent is just the privilege that it is to get to know them as people and help them through their journey. It's an adventure. We're all on the adventure together, Teams and ACUS. So I'm really excited that I get to go through life with my husband and my 2 kids. So it's a privilege, and I'm happy. And in the world of chaos that we live in, driving from place to place, and you have to be okay in the chaos, I am okay in the chaos, and I love it, and so it's a privilege.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to go ahead, Cindy.
It's really, at our stage, we're starting to see our kids become young men, young ladies, and it's exciting. That's cool. To just see where they're headed and what's going to happen next. So it's just great to watch them grow.
And the next stage is when your kids become your friends. You never stop being their parent but you can be their friend.
That's great. That's a great note to end on. Thank you so much. Before I let them go, let me just tell you real quick. Next week will be the end of our parenting series, but Dr. Matt Miller from CCCRD, he's the founder and president. It's a local counseling organization here that I think highly of. And Dr. Miller is going to be here to talk about mental health for individuals, for adults, for parents, for kids. And so I hope you'll come back next week. He's going to do a presentation, then we're going to have a short Q&A after each service. And so I think it'll be really beneficial. But just want to let you know that that's happening next Sunday during both services as well. And with that, can we just thank them for being part of our conversation this morning? I really appreciate it.